Hello, hello, hello. I'm delighted you are here. Thank you. Um, Today, in talking about what Howard Thurman said about seeking the genuine in ourselves and seeking out the genuine in community when we bring ourselves together, that's a huge part. Sorry, I'm breathless because I've been running. Part of why this work is so important is that I think over the years, people have professionalized caring ministries. And it's been like, well, only pastors matter in this regard. And I think that that is an abomination. It's not the gospel. Jesus taught his disciples that one of the most powerful things we can share is story and connection and care and a place where we can share who we are as genuine people, and the walls come down. So part of why I asked Christie and Joretta to come is because I think this church is full of stunning people who have immense gifts. And as we kind of restart our caring ministry group, I am hoping that all of you feel inspired to join in that effort together. But even if you're not specifically in the caring ministry group, I'm hoping that what is shared today will help you connect with the people in your life so that you can listen deeply and apprehend the stunning gift of each person you encounter. So, I won't call them rock stars, but these two women are heroes. Can you say that? Well, you are in my life. So sorry, it's true. And I'm so glad that they are here, and I hope you share my joy in their being here, Christie and Joretta.
Thank you. Good morning. Isn't it lovely outside? This is why you moved to Minnesota from Texas. Well, that's one reason why you moved from Texas. That's today we're going to do two things. Well, three things, of course. We're going to start with kind of if there's anything from last week that you want to talk about or discuss. And secondly, we're going to reflect on what does it mean to care for strangers and what makes a stranger. And then the third thing is that we'll think a little bit with Christie about listening and how deeply challenging and gifting it is to listen and to be listened to. So that's where we're headed today. Then we have a week off. More into it. Thank you. Then we'll have a week off and we'll take a little break and come back the last week in August and think about what does it mean to be in a ministry of care. So that's kind of where we're headed today and next week, or 2 weeks from now. So let me start by just reminding you what we did last week, because as I looked at my notes, I thought, yeah, we did do that last week. So let me just kind of the first thing was we talked a little bit about the church and Elizabeth's reminder that the church, pastoral care belongs to the church and not just to the ordained folk, although we hope that they have good training because they've gone to good seminaries, had good faculty members. But really, the church is the one that carries forward the ministry of care. We learn it from young ages if we grow up in the church. And if we come to the church as an adult, we hope that we learn it because we're around other caring people. So pastoral care is the ministry of the church. The second thing that I hope you can keep playing within your mind and spirit is to remember that the church is also the place where theological reflection takes place. It's not that it's the only place where you think theologically, but it is a place where we think about what it means to be the church, what it means to be human beings connected to God, to one another, to ourselves, to the land, to the earth. So that theological reflection, the way in which we think about or reflect upon what we care about, can be one of the significant pieces. Here's a story that A pastor told me long ago, I was doing youth workshops across the country with the United Methodist Board of Education. And we went to a place where the Sunday school room where I taught in was the choir loft, and it was one of those long, narrow, and there were like 30 people in the room. So you couldn't really see anybody because it was long and narrow. So at lunch, I had an opportunity to sit next to this pastor who had been a pastor probably 20 years or so. And I said, so what's the most interesting thing that's happened to you in terms of your theology since you've been a pastor? Dangerous question, because you never know what you're going to get. But he told this story. A little girl in his congregation had the measles or the mumps or something and was home from school. And he decided he would go and visit her, which we don't do very much anymore for all kinds of good reasons and not so good reasons. But he went to visit her. Knocked on the door, the mother answered the door. He started to talk to the mother, and the mother took him, and he said, I'm here to see Elizabeth. We're going to call her Elizabeth. And she said, I'll take you back. So she took him back, and she kind of stayed there a bit. And then he said, well, Elizabeth, how does it feel these days to have the measles? Yeah, she was kind of cranky. He said, well, what do you think about the God who loves you when you have the measles? Now, that's a theological question. What do you think about the God who loves you when you have the measles? And she said, well, would you have come and visited me if I didn't have the measles? And he said, no. She said, well, then it's okay. Now, there's something theological in there about the power and importance of connectedness in the church and in the ministry. It wasn't just because the pastor visited, but the pastor asked a question, which helped this young child think about, well, who is this God who loves me through this? It's a pretty powerful question. Simple, profound. So theological reflection belongs to the church. And all of us in this room are theological reflectors. You don't have to have a degree to do theological reflection. You just have to live and reflect on who God is, who you are in connection, who you are around. So in a moment, I'm going to give you a vignette, but I want to stop and see if there was anything from last week that you want to pick up on, or questions that you've been thinking about. It was a long time ago. Yeah, Cooper?
Question I have is the practice of listening seems to me is an internal need in order to be effective externally. And so I wonder what your response would be about listening within so that we can listen better.
Nice. So how do you listen to yourself and to the God within you, if you will, as much as you listen to, Christie's going to cover that. It's, I was just going to say, it's what's nice about the question is it again is one of those reflective questions, right? What do I need to know about myself in order to be a good listener? And the more you know about yourself, the more you will be attentive to the person that you're listening with. And I notice I said listening with, not to. It's a mutual process. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Yep.
And just to go against all the good thought that are out there and we're trained in, sometimes you don't know what's going on in you and you just boundary it off while you focus on the other.
Right. Nice point. Nice point. Nice point. Okay, any other burning questions from last week or thoughts? Okay, you remember we talked about those, Christie talked about those four principles, 4 core practices of care: attitude, presence, listening, and questioning. Attitude, presence, listening, and questioning. So building on those just a little bit, here's a vignette, and we're going to ask you in just a minute to turn to your neighbor and think about the question we pose. You're sitting in church, and you notice during the pastoral prayer that a person you know slightly is crying. After the service is over, she continues to sit in the pew looking reflective. What do you do and why? What do you do and why? Need me to read it again, or you got it? Okay, turn to your neighbor. You're sitting in the pew. The person you know a little bit is crying. She continues to sit in the pew looking reflective. What do you do and why? And you have 2 to 3 minutes to fix this. Oh, sorry. We're not going to fix it. That's the thing. We'll come back to the fixing thing. Okay, go. Go, go. Okay, we didn't give you a lot of time, but that's okay. You get to come back to your conversations eventually. Okay, what kinds of responses? What did you do and why? What kind of responses did you have? What did you do and why? Don't be shy. Yeah, I'm going to bring the microphone to you so that they can pick it up on the other side.
We had a discussion about the proximity of the person to you and whether or not your shoulders were touching, because then you might reach for the person's arm. I mean, Kelly showed me exactly what she might do if the person was right next to you. But if the person is a distance away in the pew, then Juanita said you might get a cue if they look up at you, which is an invitation maybe to stay seated. So we were looking for cues from the other person at the same time that we were thinking about what we might do.
Nice. Really nice. And cues can be telling, and the piece of that is not not assuming you know what the cue means. That's the hard piece, right? So good, I like it. What else?
I was sharing with Bill a real life experience I had here in this room. Years ago, I sat in a service that we had here, and there was a young woman sitting in the back crying. Afterwards, I went up to her and asked her what was going on, and she said that she had some bad experience and didn't think much of the church, sat out in the parking lot for several times and couldn't bring herself in. And this was the first time she came in and felt welcomed, and she kept coming back and became a friend.
Lovely. So nice. So thinking about how do you invite someone to share, because this pastoral care is a ministry of invitation, right? It's not a command performance, but how do you invite someone to share something about what's going carefully and thoughtfully, what's going on? Yeah. Yep.
Bill also asked me the question, what do you do if they say no?
Yes.
And I had a similar experience myself when my brother died, and my other brother informed me that when I was at the airport, and I went into the men's room and was crying, and this guy came and said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "No." And he left. And that was exactly what I needed, was privacy.
Yeah. Nice. So sometimes it's no, being willing to receive the no and honor it and value it. Yeah, nice.
Sometimes in that situation, I think you can just make a statement. Looks like something really touched you, which is totally generic, which is an invitation.
That's a really nice invitation because it keeps it open, and she can either respond fully or not. One last one, anybody? Yep.
I thought that the importance of whatever they say or whatever they don't say, they are in a safe environment where they can feel what they're feeling and think what they're thinking and work through permission to do what's going to be helpful to them.
Good. Sometimes people don't know what they want, right? Sometimes people need space. Sometimes people are willing to tell you their whole life story in 2 minutes. So thinking about how you invite forward and what story you want to invite to that person to share seems to be one of the key pieces. Now, the question in part is, what does it mean to care for people who are strangers to us? And we usually think about strangers as people we do not know, right? But strangers can also be people whom we know who have some moment in time, something strange is happening in their life, or something odd is happening or unfamiliar to them, or something troubling. So that stranger doesn't mean just that you don't know who they physically are because they come to the first service and you go to the second, or whatever. It's that there may be a piece of all of us. There is a piece in all of us that other people do not know. And to respect the kind of boundary around that, and to think carefully about, again, how you invite someone to share without demanding that they share or compelling them to share. The other piece of this is that care is really mutual. What I mean by that is not that sometimes I hear people say, well, when I go out to visit, I get as much out of it as the other person, which can be true. But what I mean about mutuality in this case is that we offer our presence, our gifts, our moments in time, and we don't need to determine the outcome. We might get touched by something somebody says. At other times, we might be the one who needs to be heard or listened to. So the ministry of care recognizes that you're not always the stronger one or the wise one or the one to fix it, because fixing is not good. Fixing does not help, or trying to fix it does not help. You are called simply to be present in the moment, to be available, to be open to receiving, to invite a story if it feels right. And there are other times when you will also feel like you want to be the one listened to, or that you need extra care. It's not a one-way street. There's not caregivers and people who need care. We are all in this together. There's a kind of fluidness about care that I think is important to recognize, because sometimes we get in the habit of thinking we're the only ones who can care. And that does not help. What helps is to recognize that we care together as a community, and that the care we offer is sometimes met with care received in ways that surprise us. So being open to surprises and curiosities as you listen to stories can be incredibly important. Which takes us into listening and the skill and gift of listening.
Is this going to work? Can you hear me? Okay, good. And when I get, no, not quite yet, when I get to the presentation part. The great thing about your story was that you were encountering a stranger in that worship service. And then you gave another story of when you were the stranger. And I think that's a great example of how we move fluidly, as you said, through that process. So I'm going to start with another vignette, and we'll come back to it. I'm just going to put it before us so there's a context for what we're talking about. A person that you often speak with during coffee hour after worship, she comes up to you and asks how you're doing. You're aware that they have some things going on in their own life. They've had a recent loss of a parent. Their child has just gone off to college. That's the vignette, all right? Let it just sit. All right. Would you turn to 2 or 3 people next to you? This is going to be very brief, but I'd like you to identify. Whoops. The last time you were listened to well, last time somebody carefully listened to you and you felt different because they heard you. What were they doing to make you feel that way? How did you know that they were listening? So you take 1 minute and identify behaviors. We're going to get really practical in this part. What behaviors you were listened to? What? Oh, sorry. Thanks. The time goes fast, doesn't it? Let me just toss this in. Are you using them now? Are you using them now to listen to each other? Okay, shift gears. Shift gears. Stay with your same people. Shift gears. How do you know when someone's not listening to you? How do you know when someone's not listening to you? What are their behaviors? Yep. Oh, nope. You talk to each other first, then I'll get it. Oh, the old watch look. Yeah, I love that one. Okay, let me pull you back for just a minute. I noticed there was a lot more energy when you got to how you're not listened to. Right? In the room, all of a sudden, there was a lot of energy going on. We're going to ask you to answer both of those, but what it says to me is that when you're not listened to, you feel it. It feels like a hurt, right? Yeah. Shall we, so we're going to circulate with the mic. You want me to do it, or you're going to do it?
Yep, got it.
Okay. Couple of ideas. What makes you feel listened to?
No? Say it again into the mic. So
I said nonverbal head shaking.
Maybe I could just repeat it. Would that work?
yep, that'll work.
Head shaking, a nonverbal, I'm with you. What else? Yes. Constant eye contact. Even when they're not looking, you're on their face. And people can get really hung up on that in two ways. One, where do I look? Do I look at your nose? Do I look at your eyebrows? Do I look at your, people can get really self-preoccupied with it, where you look at, but you look at a person's face or eyes. Yeah. Yep. Except in certain cultures where that would be an offense. And we just have to know that. We have to know which cultures that wouldn't work for. Yeah? Okay. What else? Yes.
The person listening lets there be some silence.
Ah, I love that. Ooh. Yes. Oh, that's lovely. I'm going to repeat it. Sometimes there has to be some silence. Person might need time to put her thoughts or his thoughts together. Another way to say that, and to add on, is to say you have to pace yourself at the person's pace, right? This is about tuning into the other. Lovely. Thank you. Yes.
I had a high school classmate, and
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So the answer was, I was such a good listener because I was a newspaper reporter. And if you watch the news, you find that people use reflecting listening techniques in their work. And we'll get to talking about that in a minute. Okay, what about when you don't feel listened to? I know you have a bunch of these. What is it that makes you not feel listened to or feeling not listened to? Yeah, Ruth.
When they say, oh, I know.
Oh, yeah. Focus shifts from them to you. Yep. They say, Zoom, I'm telling you this. Oh, there's the camera, isn't it? They say, oh, yes, I had similar experience. Yeah. Okay. What else? Yes. They don't let you finish. They finish your words for you, or they jump on to something else. Either or both. Yeah. Yeah. What else? When do you not? Looking at, we've had a couple of those, looking at the watch, even surreptitiously, you know? Yeah. Yep. You had one. No, yeah. Looking past you. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Or looking over your shoulder. Yeah. Yeah. Looking over the shoulder, looking at the phone, thumbing through a brochure. All of those distractions make the person feel, or make you feel, like you're not being heard or listened to. Yeah. Anything else you want to add to that? Okay. Sorry? Changing the subject. Changing the subject. Yeah. Yeah. Similar to going to oneself instead of, yeah. Okay. We're going to pass out, thank you, Joretta, pass out an outline. on listening. So these are skills about listening that I just want to bring to you. And in a way, it's an example of the kind of training we would do if we were in care groups to work on how to visit folks. So I'm going to talk about some of the practical skills of listening, give some examples. While that's happening, for example, do you remember last time I said my husband, I would come home, I would start pouring out my day, and he would be going through the mail as I was talking, and I'd say, "You're not listening to me," and he would say, "I can repeat back every word you just said." Was that listening? Didn't feel like it, right? But for some people, that's listening. I got the information, right? What else is there? All right. Of the things that you talked about or thought about that make a good listener, can you just think to yourself for a minute, which ones are you pretty good at? Jot them down if you like. Which ones are you pretty good at? You can count on yourself to do these things. Maybe it's, I'm really good at paying attention. Or maybe it's really good at giving encouraging nods. Identify for yourself. Got a few? And which ones do you want to keep growing in? Maybe all of them, but which ones do you particularly want to keep growing in? Just think to yourself. Jot them down. It's always important. This is a lifetime skill. Learning to listen is a lifetime skill. I've been doing this for mid-20s, late 20s when I became a chaplain, where the ministry was a listening ministry. I've been learning how to listen right up to today, and I still have a lot more I could do better at, I could learn about how to convey both understanding and attention. And we'll get into some of the nuances of that in a minute. So you should be joining your outline at this point. What is at the heart of inviting stories, or what is at the heart of listening well? And I'm just going to give you some ideas. First, presence, not doing. Now, these sound absolutely, well, of course. I mean, who has to say that twice? But watch people who are engaged in a conversation. We'll get back to that one because that's a biggie. And I do want to say, apropos of what was said earlier, listening is not preparing to do something else. Listening is not preparing to, if I can just get the information I need here, I can be of help. Listening in and of itself is the act of caring. And we forget that so easily. Because good listening is about helping the person to tell the story they need to tell and learn what they need to learn and move through what they need to move through while you witness. Second one, care, not cure. This is similar. And we'll talk again about this. But just to say here, it's so hard to resist moving from care to cure. You want to cheer people up? We are soft-hearted people who go into this work. Anybody who takes the time and energy to listen is tender-hearted. And when you're tender-hearted, it's hard to bear the struggle that someone might be experiencing, the tears that you see in the back of the room or the person sitting in the pew. It's hard. We want to make it better. It's not our work to make it better. It's theirs to experience, learn, move through, and grow. And that's what your invited listening does. Third, support, not control. Being supportive rather than taking charge of a conversation. The assumption, except in a real crisis, is that with support, the person can find their way through. I think one of the hardest things for some of us, particularly some of us who are a little bit of control freaks, and I would put myself in that category, is that we forget that the other has the resources they need in almost every situation to move through what they're experiencing. They have what they need. Our job is to invite it, hold it, offer it back, witness it. Fourth, the focus is on the other and not on the self. And that's not to say we shouldn't know ourselves. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. But the focus on the other, entering their world. The difference between sympathy and empathy, right? Sympathy is taking in what a person's saying and their feelings through our own experience. Ah, I know what that feels like. That's sympathy. That's hard. You give it back then. Empathy is saying, I don't know what this feels like. I'm going to choose to try to see this experience through the other's eyes, from behind the other's eyes, and respond to it in their frame of reference, not mine. That's empathy. And that's the focus on the other. All right, next point. Good listening is an art. It's a skill. You can learn the skill. It's also an art form, which is why it's a lifetime learning experience. And it requires certain things. It requires discipline. We mentioned that last week. Listening with discipline. What's discipline? Well, staying with the other, not getting distracted, not looking over your shoulder, not getting distracted by your own thoughts, trying to figure out what this person's really trying to say. You lose them at that point. By the way, just a piece of advice, you always will lose somebody in a conversation, at least momentarily. It's almost impossible to avoid. And the task then is to say, sorry, you said something important. I went with it for a minute. Can you say what you said just last? You're transparent. You invite the story to continue. You re-engage. Second, it requires training. Learning. As we said, it's a lifetime skill. It's so, don't we converse all the time? Aren't we listening all the time? Yes and no. It's easy to think that we know how to do this intuitively, but there's a lot of good listening work that is counterintuitive. Our intuition tells us to do one thing that would get in the way of the listening. So learning and training requires us to step outside our own world. It's not natural. We naturally tend to listen for information. And in good listening, like we're talking about, caring listening, we're not listening for information. I'll get to that a little bit later. Absolutely. Everything I say in this today would be in a training session. In fact, it is in a training session because that's what we're doing. But so yes, you're absolutely right. No judgment. How do you step inside someone else's experience if you're judging it? That's right. So third, self-awareness. Knowing what will distract you. Knowing trigger points. You know, I just, if my child just went off to college and I'm grieving that, this person's going to talk about their child going off to college, it's likely to trigger my own feelings. I have to know that and find a way to set them aside for a moment. I'll go back to it. I used to work in hospice as a chaplain. And there were times when if I'd gotten to know somebody fairly well and cared for them on a regular basis, that I would grieve as much as anybody else almost at their death. And I couldn't afford it because I had to be there for the people in that person's life who were trying to figure out how to move on with this gaping hole. But after, I would go find one of my fellow chaplains and say, can I process this with you? You don't forget it. You just put it aside temporarily. Okay. And last, in that section about what it requires true interest in the other. We talked a lot last time about attitude. What does it mean to have the attitude that tunes you in and turns you toward the other? Okay, now the fun part. What gets in the way? I could spend the entire session on our desire to fix. It's the hardest thing to train. I've done training of congregations and deacons and seminary students for 30 plus years. This is the one that's so stubborn in terms of, I think I've got it. Nope, I don't have it. And it's the blatant stuff we tend to get rid of. So the blatant, sorry, I'm losing volume, aren't I? The blatant is something like, well, what you should really do is, that's a blatant fixing, right? The subtle form of that is, have you thought about, right? I mean, I've actually had that happen in a training class. The person said, I wasn't trying to fix, I was just inviting the story. Nope, you weren't. Second, what gets in the way? Our urge to me too, right? I mean, I think it was one of you two who said, yeah, the me too. I have a friend who asks wonderful questions, and she'll ask me a question. I'll think, wow, this is a good question, and I'm going to respond, and I start to respond, and about 2 sentences in, the response that she gives isn't, wow, yeah, it's, oh, I know what that's like. I had a cousin who, right? We've all experienced that. Nothing shuts you down faster. In fact, kind of make the decision, I'm not going to try that again because it was vulnerable to try to answer that question. And two other, our urge to jump ahead of the other. I know where this is going. When I was new at this, my first couple of years in chaplaincy, I was doing pastoral counseling of outpatients, people who'd been in the hospital, in the psych. And I wasn't at all equipped to do that. They throw clergy into all sorts of situations. But I used to sit there and think, oh, I know where it's going. Let's see, what would I say if I had a whole train of, I know where she's going. And then I send subtle cues to make sure that's where she went. So jumping ahead, knowing where they're going, racing them for the answer. And finally, various biases and prejudices, which could be as simple, well, could be as complex as gender, race, orientation, all the isms. And it could be hair color, or she looks like my third cousin, or I once had a problem that was kind of similar. Those are all biases, prejudices that take you off track and put you into your own track rather than theirs. Okay, so how do you listen? With our whole embodied self to the whole embodied self of the other. Body, face, tone, content. Subtle and blatant moves. And this is a piece I want to make sure I get to, if we don't get to everything. You listen with an appreciation for the strength and goodness of the other. And that's not natural. We tend to look, oftentimes, for the flaw, for the difficulty, for the problem story, for the vulnerability, the weakness. And I would encourage you, when you think about this, to remember that people are made up of multiple stories. And they may be telling you a story of pain and struggle. And right alongside that story, but maybe forgotten, but right alongside of that story is the story of their resilience, of their strength, of their history. I'm going to tell a quick story. I was working with a woman who had a diagnosis of ovarian cancer. She came in to talk to me. And in the midst of talking about it, she said, I feel helpless. I feel hopeless. I don't see a future. I don't know where things are going. I don't know what to say. I witnessed that. I supported that story. I said, it sounds like this is a really hard time. You're feeling lots of things that you don't want to feel, but they're real. So I reflected back to her what she'd said. And then she began to talk a little bit. This is new for me. I've gone through a lot of problems in my life. I've gone through a nasty divorce. I've gone through a struggle with my family of origin. She said, in fact, I used to get into these struggles often enough that people began to call me feisty. And I said to her, what does that mean? What do you mean by feisty? Are you a feisty person? Well, I guess I am. I am a feisty person. And she talked about what feisty meant for her. And then she got to the point where she said, you know, I need to get my feisty self back in here for the fight. Both stories were true. If I'd only focused on one, if I hadn't had eyes to see the multiple stories in her life, I could have missed the story that's going to give her resources and strength to keep going. I could give lots of examples. This is a really important piece that in a training class, for example, on care ministries, we would spend time on. What does it mean to ask the inviting question to bring the other stories forward without losing track of the ones that are hard? And then finally, good listening is, and I'll just kind of move through these because we're at our time. Attentive, we've talked about that. Reflective, responsive. What does that mean? We offer encouraging responses. We nod. People were talking about that. We say, uh-huh. We do a reflection, like I said about the feisty self. We try to capture and feedback to make sure we're hearing accurately without sounding like a parrot or getting lost in the mechanics of that. David Brooks says, when someone's speaking, you should be listening so hard you're burning calories. I love that. I think that's right. It's an activity, not passive. It's the furthest thing from passive. So it's attentive, reflective, responsive. It's inviting. The responses we offer invite the story forward. It's no judgments or opinions, no cliches, no interpretation. It's just receiving the story. And I say just, when students say, I was just listening, I sort of go ballistic on that. Just. And the purpose is to build a relationship, to hear and understand, to convey that understanding, to help the other continue the story, because so often when people take the chance to tell you in the pew, yeah, I'm going through a hard time. When we sing Here I Cry because I remember the one I just lost. They feel vulnerable. And if you go, oh, okay, I was wondering what that was about, and get up and go, that's really hard on people. And they feel like you didn't want to listen. But if you say, oh, yeah, music triggered that sense of emptiness. Yeah, that's exactly what it was, emptiness. And somehow it touches me in a different place. So music is kind of a special moment for you. Then you're there with it. And they don't feel vulnerable, and they don't feel like they're wasting your time because you're showing them you're interested. The next section, and we are at the point where we're going to have to stop, is self-explanatory on your outline. It's how do you start up a caring conversation? And I think this is an entry to a much bigger topic. How do you start? That's the question we started with the vignette, wasn't it? How do you start that conversation? And I would just suggest that and someone said this word, I think you did, cues. You listen for cues. You listen for the cue that allows you to join the story. I'm going to stop there. Any questions? That was a whirlwind through the sort of the brief intro to some of the bigger topics that come with trying to teach or learn listening. Anne?
Who talked with you with like the national conversation, very prevalent.
Could you give me an example? Can you be that person for a moment?
Like such and such political person. That person's just stupid.
So right now we're kind of living in a world, aren't we, that makes it, so I'm going to say to you, right now we're kind of living in a world that makes it hard to appreciate anybody else's opinion but our own, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, and I think we get set up, don't we? That's how I can listen. What do you think? You just listen. You reflectively listen and invite. And let them keep talking, but as soon as they're heard, the vitriol goes down. Again, these are things that we would explore further. You will explore further for those of you who want to get into more of a caring ministry here. Anything else to conclude? Thank you for listening. See what I did there? It's been a pleasure to be with you. And for those of you who are interested in pursuing more about caring ministry or hospitality ministry, because there's a big range here, not just going to visit people, but how do you welcome the stranger? How do you care for the stranger? Briefly, in all contexts. That will be the 25th of August. We'll work together to figure out what would work here at Hennepin. Do you want to say a word as we conclude?
Again, I want to thank you for being here and thank Joretta and Christie for being here. You may have noticed, those of you who have read the book, that there was a pastor that Christie worked with at a church where a caring ministry group grew into a very supportive and well-resourced group. And I was that pastor at Richfield. And so the power of what can happen when we're intentional about owning our own beauty and our own capacity and joining with others is irreplaceable. So that when you go to a place where someone is, you are carrying the heart of Christ Jesus and the care of Hennepin Avenue United Methodist Church. And it's not just the hired hands who are called to do this. In fact, I went into one room shortly after I started here, and somebody said, well, they pay you to do this, right? At a hospital. And sometimes that's a perception. When you show up for somebody and you provide care, you are the body of Christ. You are a witness that this church is committed to caring and reaching out. So I thank you for your care and your interest and your curiosity. And I'm excited to see what God's got in mind for this particular ministry. Whole church too, let's get honest. But this is the heart. This is the way that we are connected one with the other. So thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. And it was a pleasure to be a co-worker with you then and now. My esteemed colleague and good friend, Joretta, is having knee surgery next week and will not be at our third session. So we will stumble along on our own to work on where we go next.
Come on up if you're willing and find some flesh you can hold on to. We're going to pray over Joretta, who's having surgery, and she gave us permission. Thank you. You didn't have to, but I'm glad you did. Find some way to feel connected. Yep, hands up works too. So if you look around at these faces, the presence of holiness. So let's pray. God of all life, we thank you for healing, for those who offer healing through their medical marvels, and for the ways we heal each other when we lean in and listen and show our care. So be with Joretta. We know you will be. Help her to know she is held in your care and your love and our hearts as well. Keep her mindful. Every breath she takes, she is beloved. Amen.
Amen.